Hello again, everybody. Section 6, Character Rigging. Video 1, entitled Why We Need Rigging and Its Purpose for Animation. Basically, we're going to be adding bones to a character that I've created pretty quickly and using dynamic topology sculpting, and I've saved that file for you to download and to open. It's entitled thedude.blend. It's a Blender file that you can open up. Or if you have your own character that you would like to rig, that's fine by me as well. You're going to be able to do either or, because we are going to learn about rigging. Before we jump into Blender, I want to go ahead and talk a little bit about the two types of movement that's associated with rigging. And rigging, yes, you put bones in the character and those bones are connected together. There's actually an add-on within Blender that we're going to be using called Rigify that's going to essentially allow us to quickly add bones to our character. But also a part of rigging is the kinematics. And there are two types. There's inverse kinematics and there's forward kinematics. Forward came first before the inverse was created. And what forward means is that essentially you have, let's say, an arm, and it has its bones extending from the shoulder to the hand. As you can see here in the picture, you kind of have the shoulder pivot point, and then the upper part of the arm, and then the elbow pivot point, and then the forearm, and then the wrist pivot point, and then the hand. You can also see that in the leg there as well. And what they would do to animate forwardly is it would go from the shoulder to the hand. They would first move the shoulder joint, then they would move the upper arm and the elbow, and then the forearm and the hand, and kind of move it and position it where they wanted it to move to. And that takes a lot of work, a lot of steps, a lot of movement. So they came up with inverse kinematics, which is a lot more intuitive, and it has an algorithm that you can literally just take the hand and move it, and it's going to detect where the elbow should bend and the shoulder, etc. So we're going to set up our rig. I'm not going to use any forward kinematics. We're going to strictly stick with the inverse kinematics because that's the better way to do it, the easier way. Unless you really want to go in and when you animate your character after the rigging, you can do it the forward way to move the arm and put it in place where you want it, but inverse kinematics is where it's at. So I just wanted to explain those two, and I'll talk about it a little bit more as we're in there and you can visually see the character. So without further ado, let's jump into Blender and get this rigging started. Okay, we're in Blender now, and I've opened up the dude, and you can see here that here's our dude. We're in object mode. I quickly made this guy using the dynamic topology sculpting that we talked about a few days ago. And I just kind of gave him arms and legs and a head, a neck, a torso, just kind of the basic things, and we are going to now add bones to this character. Right now, I sort of put him in a T pose when I made this snake sculpting brush out, close enough, but this would be considered a T pose that a lot of, when you go to animate characters, they have them in the T pose for easy animation. So let's go ahead and just get started. First things first, we need to enable the Rigify add-on, and this is a good time to explain to you that there are a lot of third-party add-ons that have been created for Blender by very intelligent people who know how to code, and they've gone ahead and created add-ons that make our life easier when we try to create things in Blender, and I'm very thankful for them, and we will give them a shout out. We want to press File here and go to User Preferences. And this is where we were before when we changed some of our input settings with our 3D view. We went ahead and changed some buttons in there, and we had talked about this in the beginning, in the very beginning of our Learning Blender 3D in 7 days. Now we are going to go to the Add-Ons tab here in the middle. I do have my screencast keys in my add-ons that I've used on some videos. We're going to go ahead and type in rig, and you can see here that there's a Rigify add-on. We can drop this arrow down, go ahead and click this check mark, and that's going to enable the add-on. And if you had ever used Blender 3D or Rigify before, you could check mark this and it would use another edition from before, the 2.76B, which is an older edition, but we're going to use the newest one out there. And so go ahead and have that checked, and then don't forget to save user settings down here. Save user settings, and then we can exit out of here. Now the Rigify add-on is enabled, and what we're going to do now is, now that we have the add-on installed, we have to ensure that our location, our rotation, and our scale is all set to the defaults of 0s and 1s. And what I mean by that is, you can see over here, press the N key to bring out this settings panel. We have our dude selected. The transform is composing of the location, the rotation, and the scale, and the dimensions. This location and rotation need to be at 0, and the scale needs to be at 1. And if yours has any numbers here, you can go ahead and reset those to 0. I have him in the middle of the screen, flush with the floor, and his origin is here on the 3D cursor. If yours is not, you can do Shift S. You can move your cursor to the center, where mine already is, and then you can come over here to Tools with the dude selected and set the origin to the 3D cursor. And now we know that his origin is right smack dab in the middle of the scene. Now, if we want to set these back to the defaults, if yours for any reason has numbers here, or the scale is not at 1, we can go ahead and do Control A, which is going to bring up our Apply submenu, and we can actually apply the rotation and scale and also apply the location. So if your location has any numbers, just hit Control A, click Location. It's going to make these go to 0. Then hit Control A again, click Rotation and Scale. It'll make rotation go to 0 and scale go to 1. That's very important when we're rigging, because the Rigify add-on, when it generates the movement pivot points and everything, it needs to have everything at a baseline so that the algorithms can work appropriately. So that pretty much goes for exporting as well, which we'll get into that in the next video in the next day. So now that we have that set, we have our 0s and 1s on our transform and our scale, we can go ahead and add our armature, which is the bones. If we come over here to Create, the Create tab, and we click on Armature, it's just going to create one little bone. And that's not what we want. If you were doing the whole skeleton manually, you can definitely use that and duplicate this bone and have your bones going all the way up. But Rigify helps us with that. Let's go ahead and delete that with X and then delete. And now what we can do is we can do Shift A for the add, and it's the same selections over there. It's just when we go to the armature in this, you see the single bone, which is what we just put in there, but you also have a couple other. You have basic, human meta rig, and animals. So you actually have some pre-made armature in here for a bird, a cat, a horse, a shark, and a wolf. Great if you're making those animals. Also, we're going to be using the basic human, and there's also a basic quadruped in here as well. We're going to use this one. There's also this human one, but I'm going to show you now. If we use that one, the meta rig, it also has a rig here for the hands and fingers. It's got the fingers already in here, the bones for the fingers. Let's move this back just a little bit. Has the bones for the fingers. It also has, if we rotate this on the Z axis, press R and then Z, we can move this guy kind of around. You can see that it has bones also for the eyes and the mouth and the nose, so that you can do facial expressions as well. And obviously the dude doesn't even have a face, so we're not going to worry about that. But you can definitely use that if you have a character that has lips and teeth and eyes and eyelids that all move independently. You can use this rig. Let's go ahead, X and delete. Zoom out again, Control, and use our mouse wheel button. So we're going to Shift A and we are going to add our Armature basic human meta rig. And this just has a spine and no hands and feet, legs, hips, everything that we need. It also has these breastbones that we don't really need unless you have the dude is definitely a dude, so he doesn't have breasts, but I guess if he had these large pecs, we could use that and have the pecs kind of move around if he was a big, strong dude. So now we can automatically see that our rig is about 1.9 meters. This is actually still in Blender units. If we go to the scene here, we can see that there's unit presets and there's selections for feet, inches, meters. We're in the Blender default, which Blender default is basically meters already. So this rig is about 1.9 meters tall, and our character is about 10.3 meters tall, which is way huge. The rig is actually a much more human size. So we're definitely going to scale our guy down. And that's also something important when you're exporting things from Blender, is to select what units you're going to be creating your character in, and to have that reflect in your export. So we're just going to use the Blender units, which are basically meters. We're going to scale him down with S, hit S, scale him down till he's about right in the general area there. Then we can zoom in and we can kind of see our bones already. Let's go ahead and right click our armature. And now we can go over here to the settings panel, click the armature little tab. There's also a bone tab, but we're going to do the armature tab, and we want to hit X-ray because we want to be able to see these bones through the character and kind of line it up with our flesh, with our mesh. And you can see here that we have arms coming out. We also have a spine. We might scale this guy up just a little bit more, just so he can be closer to the size that we want, so we're not having to move. It saves a lot of issues if you're having to move a lot of stuff. Probably don't want to do that, so let's scale him about there. So now that we have our armature here and our character scaled down to about the right size, we're going to want to make sure that our armature has its location, rotation, and scale at 0s and 1s. But now we also want to go back to our character, and you can see here, since we scaled him, our scale is now, it has been manipulated, and it's at 0.213 now instead of 1. So we're going to do the Control A, and we're going to select rotation and scale. And now you can see that we're back to 1s, which is good. So now we're ready to start putting our bones in our character. So we're going to put the joints in place, and when you select these, if you were to tab into edit mode, when you have your armature selected, that's when you can move the bones around, and you can select individual joints and whole bones and kind of go around doing that. You can see here that these joints have a roll degree, and those roll degrees do coincide. You know, it tries to follow exactly what our human bodies can pretty much roll to not get too crazy, and it also has it to where it will, when it does use the inverse kinematics, it wants to be able to manipulate the knee. If we were to move this foot up, the knee is supposed to pop out and all that stuff. So we want to try to keep everything where it's at as much as possible and at the same rotation as well. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to go ahead and fully select our armature with A, and we're going to go to options and we're going to do X-axis mirror. That way if we move one side, the other side will move and mirror that, so we don't have to be changing each side equally. We should be able to do that a lot easier. So let's go ahead and deselect everything there. Something that cool, if you want to pivot something from, like let's say we wanted to pivot at this hip joint and move this leg out so it's more within this leg, we can select this joint right here so that the leg stays intact in the same rotation. And we can do Shift S, And Shift S will allow us to manipulate where our 3D cursor is. Currently it's in the center. So we do Shift S, and we want to do the cursor to the selected, and it's going to move our 3D cursor right here to this joint. And now we can select down here our rotation and scaling pivot center and have it on the 3D cursor. And now as we hold Shift and right click our bones, and then to select all these feet bones, let's go ahead and hold Control and then left click and drag. And we can drag a circle around, and that selects all those bones there. And now we can rotate at the 3D cursor, so let's hit R and then X, and then just, not X. We want to rotate on the Y axis, hit R and then Y. Now we can just bring those out, and they kind of pivot right from the hip, and we can put them, left click to put them in place. And we're going to be using the front. Also hit 5 to put this in ortho. We'll use the 1 and 3 a lot on our numpad to go from side to front to make sure these bones are going where they need to be. So let's go ahead and press 3 on the numpad. Go to that side view. Orthographic makes it a little easier. It's more 2D. Zoom in. And we can already see that we're going to need to move some bones around. Let's go ahead and right click on this ankle joint and press G and move it forward and also up to where the ankle should be. Left click. And then this is the front of the foot. This little dot here needs to come out. Let's press G and then pull it out to the front of the foot. Left click. And you can see this bone automatically scales up with it. Now this little ball is the ball of the feet on the back part of your toes. It's also nice to know a little bit of anatomy when you're doing this so you can get the bones and the joints in the right spot. Press G, and we're going to kind of guesstimate where the balls of our feet are. The toes will probably end about here, I'd say. And that can go right there. Let's move this over just a bit. And that's pretty good. This bone right here, we can move this back up to the heel. And let's press G, and then on the Y axis, move it over. And then let's hit G, and then on the Z axis, move it up to the ball of the heel. And there we go. So now you can see it's mirrored already on the other side, so we're pretty much where we need to be on the other leg. Now let's go ahead and get to our knee. Our knee is about here, so we're going to need to bring this guy. Let's hit 3 again. Our knee's about here, so we're going to need to press G, and on the Z axis, we can move it down. And then we can press G, and then on the Y axis, hit Y. You can move this forward. And we want to have a little bit of a bend to this knee joint, pointing towards where the knee would actually bend. Because when it does that inverse kinematics and it has the algorithm to detect, it's going to know that since we already have a little bit of a degree pointed this way forward, it's going to know that that's where it wants to bend out. That's where it should push that knee out. So now that we have that, let's go ahead and work on our hips. We can go ahead and press 1. Let's go ahead and move this guy down. And this is actually our thigh bone, so this isn't really, the top of our thigh bone is pretty much the socket's going to go into our hip, but we're going to move this down the Z, press G, and then on the Z axis. Top of the femur is what this is pretty much about right there. G on the X axis, move them in just a tad. Now we can move this guy down, G on the Z. It's about halfway on this bone, so we're going to move this down. This is our hips. We can say our hips are about here. I'm going to say these are sort of our hip bones coming out. This is the top of the femur. And then we're going to move this guy's kind of elongated in the trunk here. He's kind of a weird looking human. So we're going to do our best here to move this down. This should be the chest. So let's press G on the Z axis and kind of move this down. This is sort of our tailbone right here, and then this is the spine coming up. And then we have our chest here, so we can actually kind of press G and then Z and move this up to be more of the chest area. And we'll just kind of move these, G on the Z, move these up and give them kind of a equal amount of size. Just a tad bit on that one. So now we kind of have our hips. They're a little bit far back. Let's move them. Let's press G, and then on the Y-axis, let's move this forward. Left click. Also our femur, G on the Y-axis. Now right click out of that. Let's press 3, so we're definitely... Let's just select the joint so that this whole bone system doesn't move. G on the Y, and we can move this forward to where the femur's on the leg. And that's what we're kind of doing. We're just kind of manipulating these bones, putting them into place. If you would have like an alien with 4 arms, you could create more bones coming out and add those to the rig. But right now, this metahuman basic rig is perfect for what we need. Let's go ahead, G on the Y, let's move this in, sort of right there. G on the Y, move this out a little bit straighter. The spine does kind of curve a little bit with the tailbone. That's looking pretty good. Now we have our spine moving up in our character here. Let's zoom in a little bit. Let's go ahead and fix the head. Let's press G on a Z axis and move it up to the top of the head. The ball's just protruding out the top of the head. And this is at the tip of the neck, which is about there. This is our neck bone here. We're going to want to make sure we're moving this one on the Z axis at the base of the neck. Now our clavicles, our collarbones, are going to be right here. And we'll move these up. Actually, they can stay right there, actually. That's about a good spot. And they're already kind of protruding forward, which is where they should be. This, on the other hand, needs to come down just a bit. Guess I kind of lost a bone in there. This is our chest bone, and this is just more of our spine. So we can move this down. G on the Z on these pivot points. Give this the chest part right there, and then move this down just a tad, make that bone about the same size as the other ones, and there we go. Now we have our chest and our neck and our head, and now it's time to move these arms into place. So got most of it already going pretty good here. We could probably, you know what, I'm going to move these forward just a bit because our spine sits at the back of our body, but in this case, I want to make sure that it moves the correct parts of the body, and we're not really trying to be fully towards anatomy, and we're trying to make it function when we're trying to move this character around and create animations. So now, I don't want to move these clavicle bones. They're pretty good where they're at. I do want to move this shoulder sort of joint to move this arm up. So I'm going to do what we did before. I'm going to do Shift S, and I'm going to move the cursor to the selected joint, and then our pivot is already on the 3D cursor. So I'm going to now select the rest of these bones all the way out to the hand, and I'm going to hit R, and we're just going to rotate it on the Y-axis that's pointing straight at us, kind of just move these up, kind of put it to where it is on his T pose that he is. We'll also move these just a little bit on the X-axis out, and then also G and Z, move these up just a tad. Now we have our arms almost in place. Our elbow is about, so now we want to get our, let's just move this joint just a little bit up so it's more where the clavicle ends. And now let's go ahead and press 3. We're still in orthographic. Move just a little bit so we can select this joint here. Press G on the Y-axis and just kind of Move it in, but leave a little bit of a bend. Again, for those inverse kinematics, they want to know that the elbow bends inward, that this arm's going to flow in with this a little bit bent out. Let's also take this, always helps to press G and then bring this out to the tips of the hands, which I don't have any fingers. That would be a whole another tedious thing, trying to put the bones in all the fingers and having them bend correctly, but it's not the end of the world. They're not super hard to do, it's just time consuming because they're tiny bones. Press 3. We can see here that press G, and then on the Y-axis, let's move this over just a bit to stay in the hand. Our hand's kind of flayed out. And we can hit G, and on the Z-axis, just move this up just a little bit. And it's looking pretty good. We definitely have our elbows bent out. And on the front view, let's kind of move this down just a tad on our elbows, which is nice. The Z mirror kind of works on either side. We can move our cursor back to the center and change this back to active element, so we can pivot things on the active element. It's just when we're selecting multiple bones, it's nice to have the pivot on the 3D cursor, because the active element would technically be all the bones if you have multiple things selected. So, looking pretty good. That's about where the elbow would be. Might move it just a tad on the X-axis, a little bit farther out. Left click. And now I'm getting just a little tedious. So we have the neck in place, we have the head, and that's looking really good. Our joints, our breasts are a little bit off here. I forgot about these guys, so I'm not really planning on using them. Might as well put them in the right spot. So let's go ahead and press, we can actually just do this and move this over with the arrows, with the transform arrows. His pecs would be about there. And that's good. Now we have our clavicles, everything in place. Zoom out, press 3, we have everything in line. The head's a little lopsided, but that's just because I sculpted him that way. So we should be okay.